There are places in this world that history still can't fully explain. Ancient cities built in locations that seem impossible. Massive structures standing where no civilization was ever supposed to exist. Forgotten kingdoms buried beneath deserts. Temples hidden deep within mountains. And ruins so old that entire chapters of their story have simply vanished with time. The strange part is that these places aren't legends. They're real. Archaeologists have walked through them. Researchers have studied them. Who built them? Why were they abandoned? And what happened to the people who once called them home? Tonight, we're travelling across some of the most fascinating lost places ever discovered, exploring ancient cities, forgotten empires, mysterious temples, and archaeological sites that continue to puzzle experts even today. If you enjoy uncovering the mysteries of the ancient world, consider subscribing. And before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Now get comfortable, relax. The Stone Temple, hidden inside a living mountain. Long before the rise of the Inca Empire, long before Machu Picchu appeared among the clouds of the Andes, ancient builders in Peru were already creating monuments on a scale that still surprises archaeologists today. One of the most mysterious stands in the coastal valleys of northern Peru, a place known as Sechin Bajo. At first glance, the site does not seem particularly dramatic. There are no towering pyramids visible from miles away, no golden treasures hidden beneath the ground, no giant statues watching over the landscape. Instead, Sechin Bajo appears as a collection of stone structures rising quietly from the desert valley. But appearances can be deceptive, because beneath these ancient stones lies evidence of one of the oldest monumental complexes ever discovered in the Americas. And the deeper archaeologists dug, the stranger the story became. The valley surrounding Sechin Bajo is dry for much of the year. Dust moves across the landscape while rocky hills rise in the distance. Yet thousands of years ago, this region supported early farming communities that were beginning to organize themselves in new ways. Families settled near reliable water sources, agriculture expanded, villages grew larger, and eventually people started building monuments, very large monuments. Researchers believe portions of Sechin Bajo may date back more than 5,000 years, making parts of the complex older than many famous ancient sites around the world. That discovery shocked archaeologists, because for decades, many people assumed large-scale construction in the Americas developed much later. Sechin Bajo suggested otherwise. The site revealed that organized societies were already capable of building ceremonial architecture on a remarkable scale long before many historians expected. As excavations continued, archaeologists uncovered plazas, stone walls, ceremonial spaces, and evidence of repeated construction over centuries. Generation after generation returned to the same location. Old structures were modified, new buildings appeared, the complex slowly expanded. It was almost as if the site remained important for hundreds of years, even as the people using it changed. One of the most fascinating aspects of Sechin Bajo is the way the architecture blends into the surrounding landscape. Unlike some monuments that dominate the horizon, parts of the complex seem almost connected to the hills themselves. Stone walls emerge from the earth. Terraces follow natural contours. The boundary between architecture and landscape becomes surprisingly difficult to separate. Standing there today, visitors often feel as though the site grew directly from the valley rather than being imposed upon it. That feeling has inspired comparisons to a temple hidden inside a living mountain. The builders clearly understood the landscape around them. They selected a location that was both practical and symbolic. The surrounding valley provided access to water and farmland, while nearby hills created a dramatic natural setting for ceremonies and gatherings. Yet despite years of research, major questions remain unanswered. Who exactly built Sechin Bajo? What beliefs motivated such large construction projects? Why did this location become so important? The people responsible left no written records. No surviving texts explain their intentions. No inscriptions describe their rulers. Everything archaeologists know comes from the physical evidence itself, and that evidence often raises new mysteries. Some researchers believe the site functioned as a ceremonial centre where communities gathered for religious activities. Others suggest it may have played a political role as well, helping unite different groups living throughout the valley. The truth may involve both. In many ancient societies, religion and politics were closely connected. Places of worship often became places of power. The age of the site deepens the mystery even further. When parts of Sechin-Baho were first being built, many of the world's most famous civilizations did not yet exist. The pyramids of Egypt had not been constructed. Ancient Greece had not emerged. Rome was still thousands of years in the future. Yet here, in a Peruvian valley far from those later civilizations, people were already organizing labor, moving stone, and creating monumental architecture. The achievement forces archaeologists to rethink old assumptions. History is often more complex than expected. Civilization did not develop in a single location before spreading outward. Instead, different societies around the world experimented with agriculture, architecture, and social organization in their own ways. Sechin-Baho represents one of those experiments, a remarkably successful one. Over time, however, the importance of the site declined. New centers emerged elsewhere, population shifted, ancient traditions changed. Eventually, the complex was abandoned. Wind carried dust across the structures. Walls slowly deteriorated. The valley continued its daily rhythms while the monuments faded into the landscape. For thousands of years, the site remained largely forgotten. Then archaeology brought it back into the light. Excavations revealed a story that had been hidden beneath the earth for millennia. A story of builders, ceremonies, and communities whose names have vanished from history. Yet their work survived. Today, Sechin-Baho remains one of the most important archaeological sites in Peru. Not because it contains vast treasures, not because it attracts huge crowds, but because it preserves evidence of a world that existed at the very beginning of monumental architecture in the Americas. A world where ancient builders transformed a quiet valley into something extraordinary. And thousands of years later, their stone temple still waits among the hills, guarding secrets that archaeologists are only beginning to understand. The lost city built around a sacred spring. Hidden among the rugged hills of southern Jordan lie the ruins of a forgotten city that once flourished in one of the driest regions of the ancient world. Today, the site is known as Khirbet ed-Dari. At first glance, it appears similar to many archaeological ruins scattered across the Middle East. Broken walls emerge from the landscape. Ancient stones rest beneath the desert sun. The remains of buildings stretch across a quiet valley that few travellers ever visit. Yet this was once an important destination, a place where merchants stopped during long journeys, a place where pilgrims gathered for religious ceremonies, and a place built around something incredibly valuable in the ancient world: water. In a region where rainfall could be unpredictable, and the surrounding landscape often appeared harsh and unforgiving, a reliable spring could determine whether a settlement survived or disappeared. At Khirbet ed-Dari, that spring became the heart of an entire community. The location occupied an important position near trade routes that crossed southern Jordan, travellers moving between Arabia, the Levant, and other parts of the ancient Near East passed through the region carrying goods, ideas, and religious traditions. Some came seeking trade, others came seeking something more spiritual, because the settlement gradually developed into a sacred centre. Archaeologists believe the site reached its greatest importance during the Nabatean period. The Nabateans are best known for constructing Petra, the famous city carved into sandstone cliffs. But Petra was only one part of a much larger network of settlements, temples, and trade centres spread across the region. Khirbet ed-Dari appears to have been one of them. Excavations revealed evidence of an impressive temple complex that once dominated the settlement. Stone stairways led towards sacred areas. Courtyards welcomed visitors arriving from distant places. Decorative carvings covered portions of the architecture, reflecting the artistic traditions of the Nabateans. The temple itself became the focal point of the community. Researchers believe religious ceremonies were held there for generations. The spring likely played a role in these activities. Throughout history, water sources often carried spiritual significance. Springs brought life to otherwise difficult environments. They supported agriculture, sustained travellers, and allowed settlements to grow. For many ancient cultures, such places naturally became associated with sacred beliefs. Khirbet ed-Dari seems to fit that pattern. The more archaeologists uncovered, the clearer it became that this was not merely a small village built beside a water source. It was a carefully planned settlement connected to larger networks of trade and religion. Stone-paved streets linked different sections of the site. Public spaces served both practical and ceremonial functions. The community appears to have attracted people from a variety of backgrounds. That diversity reflects the world of the Nabateans. Their trade routes connected distant regions across the ancient Middle East. Goods moved through deserts that many outsiders considered impossible to cross. Frankincense, spices, textiles, and luxury products passed through their territory on the way to major cities throughout the region. Places like Khirbet el-Khudari benefited from those connections. Merchants arriving at the settlement would have encountered travellers from distant lands. Different languages may have been spoken, different customs may have mixed together. The city stood at the crossroads of movement and exchange, yet like many ancient settlements, its prosperity did not last forever. Political conditions changed, trade routes evolved. The importance of certain regions increased while others declined. Over time, the city began losing the advantages that had once supported its growth. The temples gradually fell silent, buildings deteriorated, the population decreased. Eventually, the settlement was abandoned. The spring remained, the city disappeared. For centuries, the ruins sat quietly among the hills, while wind and weather slowly altered the landscape. Stones collapsed, soil covered portions of the site. Generations passed without fully understanding what once existed there. Then archaeology brought the forgotten city back into view. Excavations revealed temples, homes, streets, and artifacts hidden beneath the earth. Each discovery helped reconstruct the story of a place that had almost vanished from history. Researchers learned more about Nabatean architecture, more about religious life, more about the communities that once depended upon the spring, yet important questions remain unanswered. Which gods were worshipped here? How many pilgrims visited the temple each year? What ceremonies took place beside the water that gave life to the settlement? The ruins provide clues, but not complete answers. That uncertainty is part of what makes Khirbet el-Khudari so fascinating. Unlike famous archaeological sites crowded with visitors, this forgotten city remains relatively unknown. It quietly preserves evidence of a world built around one of the most precious resources imaginable. A spring in the desert, a sacred place in the hills, and a community that flourished for centuries before slowly fading into history. Today, the water still flows, the ruins still stand, and beneath the Jordanian sun, the lost city continues guarding the secrets of the people who once gathered around its life-giving spring. The ancient city hidden inside a mountain maze. High in the mountains of southwestern Turkey, surrounded by steep valleys and rugged cliffs, lie the ruins of a city that once ranked among the most impressive settlements in the ancient world. Today, the site is known as Sagalassos. Reaching it requires climbing into a landscape of winding mountain roads, rocky slopes, and deep canyons that seem designed to keep outsiders away. Even now, the location feels isolated, which makes one question immediately stand out. Why would anyone build a major city here? The answer begins more than 2,000 years ago. Long before the ruins appeared on maps, Sagalassos occupied a strategic position, overlooking important routes through the mountains. Travellers moving between the Mediterranean coast and the interior of Anatolia often passed nearby. The location offered protection. The surrounding terrain acted like a natural fortress. Steep slopes guarded the city from multiple directions, while elevated ground provided views across the valleys below. For ancient builders, it was an ideal place to establish a settlement. Over time, that settlement grew. Stone buildings climbed the mountainside, public squares appeared, temples, fountains, baths, and markets transformed the city into a thriving urban centre. By the Roman period, Sagalassos had become one of the most important cities in the region. Its residents enjoyed impressive architecture that rivaled settlements far larger than their own. The remains still demonstrate that ambition today. Visitors walking through the ruins encounter monumental structures rising from the mountainside. Massive stone blocks remain stacked in place after centuries of earthquakes and harsh weather. Columns stand against the backdrop of distant peaks. Ancient streets climb steep slopes between public buildings. Everywhere, the landscape and the city seem intertwined. One of the most remarkable features is the monumental fountain. Fed by mountain water, the structure once provided fresh water to residents, while serving as a symbol of civic pride. Amazingly, after extensive restoration work, water flows through parts of the fountain again today. For a brief moment, visitors can experience something surprisingly close to what ancient residents once saw. The sound of water echoing through a mountain city. Archaeologists have spent decades studying the site. Their discoveries revealed a community that was wealthier and more sophisticated than many expected. Beautiful sculptures emerged from the ruins. Detailed carvings survived on public buildings. Evidence of workshops, homes, and marketplaces painted a picture of daily life in a prosperous Roman city. Yet despite its success, Sagalassos faced a challenge that no amount of wealth could prevent: nature. The mountains that protected the city could also be unforgiving. Earthquakes periodically struck the region. Harsh winters affected transportation. Landslides threatened parts of the surrounding landscape. For centuries, the city survived these challenges. Then larger problems appeared. Political instability spread across parts of the empire. Trade patterns shifted. Economic conditions changed. As opportunities declined, maintaining a large mountain city became increasingly difficult. The population gradually decreased. Buildings fell into disrepair. Public spaces became quieter. The city that once echoed with activity slowly began to empty. Then came another devastating earthquake. Researchers believe seismic activity caused significant damage throughout the settlement. Structures collapsed. Infrastructure suffered. Recovery became increasingly difficult. For many residents, leaving may have seemed easier than rebuilding once again. Over time, the city was abandoned. Nature slowly reclaimed the slopes. Vegetation spread through the ruins. Stone blocks tumbled from damaged walls. The mountain city disappeared from the attention of the wider world. For centuries, only scattered remains hinted at what once existed there. Then archaeologists arrived. As excavations expanded, the true scale of Sagalassos began to emerge. Monumental buildings appeared beneath layers of soil. Sculptures were uncovered. Streets and public spaces reappeared after centuries of silence. The discoveries transformed understanding of the region. Researchers realized that an extraordinary city had been hidden among the mountains, all along. Yet perhaps the most impressive aspect of Sagalassos is its setting. Unlike many ancient cities built on open plains, this settlement seems woven directly into the landscape. Cliffs rise beyond its buildings. Valleys disappear into the distance. Mountains surround the ruins from every direction. Standing there today, it is easy to understand why the city remained hidden for so long. The terrain itself acts like a maze of ridges, canyons, and mountain passes that concealed one of Turkey's greatest archaeological treasures. And even now, thousands of years after its founding, Sagalassos continues watching over the valleys below. A forgotten city among the mountains, a masterpiece of Roman engineering, and one of the most spectacular ancient ruins hidden within the natural maze of Turkey's highlands. The giant tomb, older than Stonehenge. Thousands of years before castles appeared across Europe, before the Roman Empire existed, and even before the first stones of Stonehenge were raised on the plains of Britain, ancient builders in southern Spain were already constructing one of the most extraordinary monuments of the prehistoric world. Today, it is known as the Dolmen of Menga. At first glance, the structure appears almost like a natural hill rising from the landscape. Grass covers much of its surface. The entrance seems surprisingly modest. Nothing immediately prepares visitors for what waits inside. Then they step through the doorway, and everything changes. A long stone corridor stretches into darkness. Massive slabs tower overhead. Enormous stone pillars support a ceiling built from blocks so heavy that modern visitors often stop in disbelief. The scale feels impossible, especially when considering its age. Researchers believe the monument was built around 3700 BC. That makes it older than Stonehenge, older than many Egyptian pyramids, and older than countless civilizations that would later dominate history. The question is obvious. How did prehistoric people build something like this? The Dolmen of Menga stands near the modern city of Antequera in southern Spain. The surrounding landscape consists of rolling hills, fertile plains, and unusual rock formations that dominate the horizon. One of those formations may hold an important clue. A mountain known as Peña de los Enamorados rises nearby, its shape resembling a human face lying on its back. Unlike many prehistoric tombs that align with the sunrise or celestial events, the entrance of Menga points directly toward this mountain. The decision appears intentional, and it remains one of the monument's greatest mysteries. Why would ancient builders orient the tomb toward a mountain instead of the sky? Archaeologists continue debating the answer. Some believe the mountain held spiritual significance for the communities that lived here thousands of years ago. Others suggest it may have been connected to local beliefs now lost to history. Whatever the reason, the alignment reveals that the builders carefully planned every aspect of the structure. Nothing was accidental. The tomb itself is enormous. Some of the stone blocks used in construction weigh more than 100 tons. Even today, moving stones of that size would require significant planning and equipment. Yet the people responsible possessed neither metal machinery nor modern technology. Everything had to be accomplished using human effort, simple tools, and remarkable organization. The achievement becomes even more impressive inside. The chamber extends deep beneath the mound, creating a space unlike most prehistoric tombs found elsewhere in Europe. Standing within the monument produces a strange feeling. The air becomes cooler, sounds echo softly from the stone walls, and the sheer size of the chamber creates the impression of entering something far larger than expected. For ancient communities, the experience may have been deeply symbolic. Researchers believe Menga served as a burial monument for important members of society. Human remains discovered inside suggest that generations used the structure over long periods of time. Yet it was probably more than a simple tomb. Monuments of this scale often played important roles in ceremonies, gatherings, and religious traditions. The effort required to build them suggests they carried enormous significance. Entire communities may have participated in construction. Families likely returned to the site repeatedly across generations. The tomb became part of the landscape itself, a permanent reminder of ancestors and shared beliefs. Over thousands of years, the world around Menga changed dramatically. New cultures arrived. Empires rose and fell. Languages evolved. Religions spread across Europe. Yet the giant stone monument endured. Its builders disappeared into history. Their names vanished. Their stories were forgotten. But the tomb remained. For centuries, local people knew the structure existed, even if they no longer understood its origins. The monument became part of the region's identity long before archaeologists began studying it scientifically. When researchers finally investigated the site in detail, they realized they were looking at one of the greatest prehistoric achievements in Europe. Every new study revealed additional surprises. The engineering was more sophisticated than expected. The alignment was unusual. The scale was extraordinary. And perhaps most fascinating of all, the monument challenged old assumptions about prehistoric societies. For a long time, people imagined early communities as small groups with limited abilities. Sites like Menga tell a different story. They reveal populations capable of planning massive projects, organizing labor, and creating monuments that survived for thousands of years. The builders may not have left written records, but they left something else: stone. And stone can tell powerful stories. Today, visitors continue entering the ancient chamber much as people did thousands of years ago. The massive roof stones still hang overhead. The corridor still leads into the heart of the monument, and the mysterious mountain still rises beyond the entrance. The same mountain the builders deliberately chose to face. Thousands of years later, nobody knows exactly why. Perhaps that secret vanished with the people who created the tomb. Or perhaps the answer still waits somewhere within the landscape surrounding it. A giant tomb older than Stonehenge, a monument built by forgotten hands, and one of the most remarkable prehistoric mysteries in all of Europe. The fortress hidden above the clouds. High above the Spanish countryside, rising from a long rocky ridge that dominates the surrounding landscape, stand the ruins of one of the largest and most powerful fortresses ever built in medieval Europe. Known as Gorma's Fortress, the site appears almost unreal from a distance. Its massive walls stretch across the crest of a hill, like a stone serpent guarding the horizon. The fortress seems less like a building, and more like part of the mountain itself. For centuries, anyone approaching the region would have seen it long before reaching it, and that was exactly the point. The fortress occupies a commanding position overlooking the Duero Valley in central Spain. From its walls, defenders could observe movement across vast areas of countryside. Roads, settlements, and river crossings all fell within view. Nothing happened in the region without the fortress knowing about it. The location alone made Gormaz one of the most valuable military positions in medieval Spain. Yet its story begins long before the ruins visitors see today. During the early Middle Ages, much of the Iberian Peninsula was divided between competing powers. Christian kingdoms controlled territories in the north, while Muslim rulers governed large portions of the south. The frontier between them shifted constantly. Battles were fought, cities changed hands, new fortifications appeared across the landscape. In this world of uncertainty, strongholds like Gormaz became essential. The fortress reached its greatest importance during the 10th century, under the Caliphate of Córdoba. Rulers understood the strategic value of the ridge and invested enormous resources into strengthening its defences. The result was extraordinary. Gormaz became one of the largest fortresses in Europe. Its walls stretched for nearly a kilometre across the ridge. Massive towers projected outward at regular intervals. Gates controlled access to the interior. Soldiers stationed within the fortress could respond quickly to threats emerging from almost any direction. The scale impressed even later generations. Visitors arriving at the site today often struggle to imagine the amount of labour required to build such a structure. Thousands of stones had to be transported, walls had to be raised, defensive systems had to be planned carefully. Every section served a purpose. The builders were creating far more than a simple castle. They were creating a military machine. Walking through the ruins today reveals hints of that ambition. Portions of the walls remain standing after more than 1,000 years. Towers continue overlooking the valley below. Ancient gateways still mark the entrances once used by soldiers, officials, and travellers. Even in ruin, the fortress feels powerful. Part of that feeling comes from the landscape itself. The ridge rises dramatically above the surrounding countryside. Strong winds sweep across the hilltop. The valley stretches endlessly into the distance. Standing on the walls, it becomes easy to understand why commanders valued the location so highly. An approaching army would have been visible long before reaching the fortress. Defenders enjoyed every possible advantage. Yet despite its strength, Gormaz was never completely secure. The frontier remained unstable. Military campaigns continued for generations. Control of the fortress shifted multiple times as different rulers fought for dominance over the region. Each conquest added another chapter to its history. Each ruler left traces behind. For centuries, the fortress remained one of the most important strongholds in central Spain. Then the political landscape began to change. As Christian kingdoms expanded southward, the frontier moved away from the region. Locations that once occupied critical military positions gradually became less important. The same fortress that had once stood at the centre of major conflicts found itself far from the front lines. Its strategic value declined. The soldiers departed. Maintenance slowed. The massive walls that once protected armies gradually fell silent. Over time, sections collapsed. Stone was removed for use elsewhere. Nature slowly reclaimed parts of the ridge. The fortress entered a long period of decline. Yet unlike many medieval strongholds that disappeared completely, Gormaz survived. Its size helped preserve it. Its location protected it. And perhaps most importantly, its isolation prevented large-scale destruction. When archaeologists and historians later studied the site, they discovered one of the best-preserved examples of frontier military architecture in Spain. The fortress provided valuable insights into a period when cultures, religions, and kingdoms competed for control of the Iberian Peninsula. But beyond the history lies something else: atmosphere. Few places capture the feeling of a medieval frontier quite like Gormaz. The wind still moves across the ridge. The valley still stretches below. The walls still stand against the sky. And for a moment, it becomes possible to imagine watchmen scanning the horizon for distant riders. A messenger approaching with news from another kingdom, or an army appearing far below in the valley. Today, the fortress remains one of Spain's great hidden historical treasures. A giant stronghold built for war, a monument to medieval engineering, and a place where stone walls still watch over the landscape they were built to defend more than 1,000 years ago. The ancient city built beneath a forest of stone. In one of the harshest landscapes on Earth, where deserts stretch toward the horizon and powerful winds sweep across empty plains, lie the remains of a city that should never have existed. The site is known as Shah-e-Sukte. The name means the burnt city, and for more than 5,000 years its ruins have rested beneath the sands of southeastern Iran. Founded around 3200 BC, it became one of the largest urban settlements of the Bronze Age before eventually being abandoned for reasons that remain uncertain. At first glance, the landscape feels lifeless. The ground is dry, the air is harsh, and the nearest signs of modern civilization seem very far away. Yet thousands of years ago, this place was home to a thriving city filled with workshops, homes, markets, and busy streets. People traded goods here. Craftsmen created jewellery and pottery. Merchants travelled through the region carrying products from distant lands. For centuries, Shahrisukte flourished in the middle of an environment that appears completely unforgiving today. The scale of the city surprised archaeologists. Excavations revealed a settlement covering more than 150 hectares, making it one of the largest cities of its time. The site contained residential districts, industrial areas, monumental structures, and a vast cemetery holding thousands of graves. This was not a small village struggling to survive. It was a major urban centre, and somehow it developed in a region that many people now associate with desert wilderness. One of the most fascinating aspects of Shahrisukte is how advanced the city appears. Archaeologists uncovered evidence of sophisticated planning, specialised industries, and long-distance trade connections. Objects discovered at the site suggest contact with cultures hundreds of miles away. The city was connected to a much larger world. Ideas flowed through it, goods flowed through it, and for a time, prosperity flowed through it as well. Then came the discoveries that made the site famous. Among the artefacts uncovered by archaeologists was an artificial eye believed to be thousands of years old. Researchers also found evidence of surprisingly advanced medical practices. One burial contained signs of ancient cranial surgery. Another discovery revealed what some consider one of the earliest examples of animated imagery, a painted vessel showing a sequence of movement when rotated. Each new excavation seemed to challenge assumptions about what people could accomplish during the Bronze Age. The city appeared far more sophisticated than expected. Yet despite all these discoveries, the greatest mystery remains the city itself. Why was it built here? Ancient Shahrisukte occupied a very different environment than the one visible today. Water sources existed nearby, and the region appears to have been far more hospitable than the desert landscape surrounding the ruins now. Over time, however, conditions changed. Waterways shifted, the environment transformed, and the city gradually declined. Researchers believe the settlement experienced multiple phases of occupation and destruction. Evidence suggests fires occurred more than once throughout its history, contributing to the name by which it is known today. Eventually, the city was abandoned altogether. The reasons remain uncertain. Environmental change may have played a role. Economic decline may have contributed. Political shifts could have affected trade routes that once sustained the settlement. Perhaps several factors combined together. Whatever happened, one of the greatest cities of the ancient world slowly disappeared beneath the dust. For centuries, the ruins remained hidden. The people who built the city vanished from history. Their language remains uncertain. Many aspects of their culture are still poorly understood, and unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, no vast collection of written records survived to explain their story. Instead, archaeologists must piece together the past from fragments. A piece of pottery, a ruined wall, a forgotten grave, a buried workshop. Each discovery reveals another glimpse of a civilization that once flourished at the crossroads of ancient trade routes. Today, visitors walking among the ruins often notice how quiet the site feels. The city that once held thousands of people now sits beneath an endless sky. Wind moves across the landscape. Dust drifts over ancient foundations, and the silence makes it difficult to imagine the crowds that once filled these streets. Yet beneath that silence lies one of the most important archaeological sites in Asia. A city older than many of history's greatest civilizations, a place filled with inventions, mysteries, and unanswered questions. And despite decades of excavation, researchers believe much of Shahrisukte still remains buried beneath the earth, waiting, just as it has for more than 5,000 years, the fortress that controlled 3 continents. On the edge of the Mesopotamian plains, where ancient empires once collided, stand the forgotten ruins of a city that was built for one purpose above all else: control. Today, the site is known as Dara. Most travellers have never heard of it. There are no giant pyramids here, no famous temples attracting millions of visitors every year. Yet more than 1,500 years ago, Dara was one of the most important military cities on Earth, because whoever controlled Dara controlled the frontier between 2 superpowers, and in many ways the future of entire regions depended on what happened behind its walls. The ruins lie in southeastern Turkey near the border of modern Syria, overlooking a landscape that has witnessed countless armies, caravans, and migrations throughout history. At first glance, the remains appear surprisingly quiet. Broken walls stretch across rolling hills, ancient stone structures emerge from the ground, fragments of towers still stand against the horizon. But during its height, this was anything but a peaceful place. The story began during the late Roman Empire. At the time, Rome controlled vast territories stretching across Europe, North Africa, and parts of the Middle East. To the east stood another powerful rival, the Persian Empire. For centuries, the two civilizations competed for influence across Mesopotamia. Cities changed hands, armies marched across deserts, fortresses became symbols of survival, and Dara became one of the most important of them all. The city was established during the late 5th century as a massive frontier fortress, designed to strengthen Roman defences against Persia. The location was chosen carefully. The surrounding plains provided clear views of approaching armies, while nearby trade routes connected the region to larger networks across the ancient world. Engineers immediately began constructing defences on an extraordinary scale. Massive walls surrounded the city, towers guarded vulnerable points, gates controlled movement in and out of the settlement. Everything was designed with war in mind. Yet Dara was far more than a military base. Inside the walls existed a thriving urban centre. Thousands of people lived there. Markets operated daily. Craftsmen worked in workshops. Religious buildings served local communities. The fortress became a city in its own right. One of the most impressive achievements was hidden beneath the streets: water. The surrounding region often struggled with limited rainfall, yet Dara required enough water to support both its population and its defenders during potential sieges. Roman engineers responded with remarkable ingenuity. They created reservoirs, channels, and underground systems capable of storing enormous amounts of water. Some of these structures survive today. Visitors exploring the ruins often discover vast underground chambers carved into stone. The scale is astonishing. Without these systems, the city could never have survived prolonged attacks, and attacks were inevitable. The Persians understood the importance of Dara just as clearly as the Romans did. Over the centuries, the city became the focus of repeated conflicts between the two empires. Armies gathered outside its walls. Battles erupted across the surrounding plains. Entire campaigns were organised around the struggle to control the fortress. At times, thousands of soldiers occupied the region. The fate of the frontier often depended on who held Dara. Its importance extended far beyond local politics. The city stood near the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Trade routes connected distant regions. Merchants passed through carrying goods from across the known world. Ideas travelled alongside commerce, religions spread, cultures interacted. In many ways, Dara occupied one of the most strategic locations imaginable. It was a gateway between continents, a fortress standing at the meeting point of worlds, yet even the strongest walls cannot last forever. As centuries passed, new powers emerged across the region. Empires rose and fell, political borders shifted, the strategic importance of Dara gradually changed. Repeated wars damaged parts of the city, earthquakes affected structures, economic activity declined. Slowly, the great fortress began losing the prominence it once enjoyed. The population decreased, buildings fell into disrepair, the frontier moved elsewhere. Eventually the city was abandoned, the soldiers disappeared, the markets fell silent, and the fortress that once guarded an empire became part of the landscape. For generations the ruins remained largely forgotten. Wind swept across the abandoned streets. Grass grew between broken stones. The world moved on. Yet beneath the surface, remarkable traces survived. Modern archaeologists uncovered extensive fortifications, underground reservoirs, churches, tombs, and public buildings that revealed the true scale of the city. Each excavation added another piece to the story. The discoveries showed that Dara was not merely a border outpost, it was one of the great frontier cities of the ancient world. A place where military power, engineering, trade, and daily life came together on an extraordinary scale. Today, visitors walking through the ruins often find themselves imagining the city at its peak. The towering walls, the crowded streets, the soldiers watching the horizon from defensive towers. And beyond them, the vast plains stretching toward distant empires. A fortress, built to defend a civilization. a city standing between rival worlds, and one of the most important strongholds ever constructed in ancient Mesopotamia. The stone monastery, hidden in a vertical cliff. Near the border between Georgia and Azerbaijan, in a remote landscape of rolling hills and rocky ridges, lies one of the most unusual religious sites in the world. At first glance, the region appears almost empty. The terrain is dry. The hills stretch endlessly toward the horizon. Strong winds move across the open landscape beneath a vast sky. Nothing about the area suggests that thousands of people once travelled here seeking solitude, prayer, and spiritual guidance. Then the cliffs appear, and carved directly into the stone are hundreds of chambers, tunnels, chapels, and living spaces hidden within the rock itself. This is David Goreha, a monastery unlike almost any other, because instead of being built on top of a mountain, it was built inside one. The story begins during the 6th century. According to tradition, a monk known as St. David arrived in the region as part of a group of Christian missionaries who helped spread monastic life throughout Georgia. Seeking isolation from the growing cities and settlements, he chose this remote wilderness as a place of prayer. At the time, the landscape would have seemed ideal. Far from political centres, far from busy trade routes, far from the distractions of ordinary life. Soon, other monks followed. What began as a small religious community gradually expanded into an enormous monastic complex spread across multiple hills and cliffs. Instead of constructing large buildings, many of the monks carved their homes directly into the rock. Small chambers appeared, then chapels, then entire networks of caves connected by narrow pathways and staircases. Generation after generation added new spaces. The mountain itself slowly became a monastery. Today, visitors exploring David Goreha often find themselves walking through corridors cut directly into stone centuries ago. Some chambers are simple, others contain remarkable artwork. Ancient frescoes still survive on certain walls, their colours fading but still visible after hundreds of years. These paintings provide valuable clues about the people who once lived here. Scenes from religious life appear throughout the complex. Saints gaze outward from stone walls. Biblical events unfold across ceilings and chambers. The artwork transformed the caves into places of worship as well as shelter. The location itself played a major role in the monastery's development. The surrounding cliffs provided natural protection. At the same time, the elevated positions offered spectacular views across the landscape. For monks seeking isolation and contemplation, few places could have been more suitable. Yet life here was never easy. Water was limited. The climate could be harsh. Winters brought cold temperatures while summers often became extremely hot. Everything had to be carried across difficult terrain. Living inside the cliffs required dedication. Perhaps that was the point. Many monastic traditions emphasize simplicity, sacrifice, and separation from ordinary comforts. David Goreha provided all three. The community eventually became one of the most important religious centers in Georgia. Pilgrims traveled long distances to visit. Students arrived to study. Religious manuscripts were copied and preserved within the monastery. For centuries, the complex flourished. Then came periods of hardship. The region experienced invasions, political instability, and military conflict. Various armies passed through the surrounding landscape over the centuries. Some parts of the monastery suffered damage. Certain communities were abandoned, others survived. Yet despite repeated challenges, David Goreha endured. Its remote location helped protect it. Its stone construction helped preserve it. And perhaps most importantly, generations continued returning to the site even after difficult periods. The cliffs themselves became guardians of memory. One of the most remarkable features of the complex is its scale. Many first-time visitors expect a handful of caves. Instead, they discover an entire network stretching across multiple hillsides. Hundreds of chambers remain visible. Some served as living quarters. Others functioned as storage areas. Many became chapels and places of worship. The mountain contains what amounts to a hidden city carved into stone, and much of it remains surprisingly untouched. Walking through the site today can feel almost surreal. Ancient stairways climb steep slopes. Doorways open into dark chambers. Windows carved into rock frame views of distant valleys. Every turn reveals another reminder of the people who lived here centuries ago. Yet despite all that archaeologists and historians have learned, mysteries remain. How many monks once lived within the complex? How much of the monastery still remains undiscovered? And how many ancient paintings and manuscripts were lost during centuries of conflict? The cliffs hold many answers, but not all of them. Today, David Garia remains one of the most extraordinary religious sites in the Caucasus. A monastery carved into a mountain, a community built within stone, and a place where faith, isolation and history became permanently etched into the cliffs themselves. High above the surrounding plains, the caves still watch over the landscape. Much as they have for nearly 1,500 years, the stone complex hidden in a sea of grass. In the remote heart of southern Siberia, surrounded by vast grasslands, windswept mountains, and one of the most isolated landscapes on Earth, sits a mysterious stone complex that has puzzled researchers for decades. Known as Por-Bajin, the site appears almost impossible. From above, it looks like the remains of a giant fortress rising from the centre of a lonely island. Massive walls form a nearly perfect rectangle. Courtyards divide the interior. Buildings once stood neatly arranged inside the enclosure. The strange part is not what it looks like. The strange part is where it was built. Por-Bajin stands on a small island in the middle of Terikol Lake, far from major settlements and trade routes. Even today, reaching the site can be difficult. The surrounding region is sparsely populated, and during winter the landscape becomes incredibly harsh. Which raises an obvious question. Why would anyone build a massive stone complex here? The mystery begins during the 8th century. Researchers believe the site was constructed during the Uyghur Khaganate, a powerful empire that once controlled enormous areas of Central Asia. At the time, the Uyghurs governed trade routes, commanded armies, and maintained connections stretching across the Asian continent. Building a large complex was well within their capabilities, but Por-Bajin doesn't behave like most ancient cities. Excavations revealed walls, gates, courtyards, and evidence of carefully planned construction. The layout resembles a palace or administrative centre. Some scholars even compared parts of the design to Chinese architecture from the same period. Yet something seems missing. Evidence suggests the site may not have been occupied for very long. For such a massive project, archaeologists expected signs of extended activity. Instead, many findings indicate that the complex may have been abandoned surprisingly quickly. That discovery deepened the mystery. If Por-Bajin was a fortress, why was it built in such an isolated location? If it was a palace, why was it seemingly used for such a short time? And if it was an important administrative centre, where are the signs of a large supporting population? Researchers have proposed numerous theories. Some believe the site served as a royal residence used only during certain seasons. Others suggest it functioned as a monastery or ceremonial centre. A few scholars think it may have been connected to political events that suddenly changed before the complex could reach its full purpose. The truth remains uncertain. The island itself adds to the atmosphere. Surrounded by water and distant mountains, Por-Bajin feels separated from the outside world. Fog sometimes drifts across the lake, winds move through the grasslands, the ruins stand alone against a landscape that feels almost untouched by time. Visitors often describe the location as eerie, not because it is frightening, but because it feels unfinished, like a place that was meant to become something important before history unexpectedly changed direction. Modern studies have revealed another fascinating clue. Researchers discovered evidence suggesting earthquakes may have affected the site shortly after construction. Geological investigations found signs of seismic activity in the area, leading some experts to wonder whether natural disasters contributed to the abandonment. If true, the project may have been interrupted before it could fully develop. Yet even that explanation leaves questions unanswered. The builders invested enormous resources into creating Por-Bajin. Transporting materials, constructing walls and organising labour in such a remote region would have required significant effort. People clearly believed the location mattered. The challenge is understanding why. For centuries, the ruins remained largely forgotten. The remote location protected the site from major development, allowing much of its original layout to survive. When archaeologists finally began studying it in detail, they found one of the most unusual ancient complexes in Siberia. A fortress with no obvious enemy, a palace with few signs of residence, a monumental project that may have been abandoned almost as quickly as it was built. Today, Por-Bajin remains one of Central Asia's greatest archaeological mysteries. Standing alone in a sea of grass and water, the ancient walls continue guarding secrets that historians have yet to fully understand. And nearly 1,300 years after its construction, the stone complex still asks the same question. What was this place truly built for? The lost ceremonial center hidden in desert mountains. Along the southern coast of Peru, where vast deserts meet towering mountains and almost no rain falls throughout the year, stand the remarkably preserved ruins of an ancient settlement known as Tambo, Colorado. At first glance, the site feels strangely out of place. Bright desert plains stretch toward the horizon. Rocky hills rise in the distance. The surrounding landscape appears harsh and unforgiving. Yet in the middle of this environment stands an enormous complex of plazas, walls, courtyards, and ceremonial buildings that once played an important role in one of the largest empires in the ancient Americas. The site was built by the Inca. But unlike famous places such as Machu Picchu, Tambo, Colorado remains relatively unknown, which makes it even more fascinating, because it preserves something that many Inca sites have lost: colour. Even today, traces of red, yellow and white paint remain visible on parts of the walls. Thousands of years ago, the complex would have appeared far more vibrant than the stone ruins most people associate with the Inca world. The name Tambo, Colorado actually means Red Inn, a reference to the colours that still survive despite centuries of exposure to the desert environment. The settlement occupied a strategic location along the Capac Ñan, the vast road network that connected the Inca Empire. Messengers passed through here, officials stopped here, travellers rested here. The site functioned as an important administrative centre, linking distant regions of the empire. Yet archaeologists believe it may have served another purpose as well: ceremony. The layout of the complex suggests that certain spaces were designed for gatherings, rituals, and official events. Large open plazas occupy the centre of the site. Elevated platforms overlook important areas. Buildings appear carefully arranged according to a broader plan. Nothing seems accidental. Everything feels organised, intentional. The surrounding mountains may have played a role in that design. Throughout the Andes, mountains often held spiritual significance. Many ancient communities viewed prominent peaks as sacred places connected to powerful forces within nature. Some researchers believe locations such as Tambo, Colorado were positioned partly because of their relationship to the surrounding landscape. The mountains were not merely scenery, they were part of the meaning. Walking through the ruins today reveals how impressive the site once was. Long walls divide different sections of the complex. Courtyards open unexpectedly between buildings. Narrow passageways connect larger ceremonial spaces. The architecture reflects the remarkable organizational abilities of the Inca state. Everything had a purpose, everything followed a plan. Yet despite its importance, the settlement's active life was surprisingly brief. The arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century transformed the Andes forever. The empire that built Tambo, Colorado collapsed. Administrative systems disappeared. Trade networks changed. The ceremonial center gradually lost the role it once played. Over time, the desert reclaimed the surrounding landscape. The crowds vanished. The ceremonies ended. The officials departed. Only the walls remained. Fortunately, the dry climate helped preserve much of the site. Unlike regions affected by heavy rainfall, the coastal deserts of Peru often protect ancient structures remarkably well. That preservation allows modern visitors to experience something rare: a glimpse of an Inca administrative centre that still retains traces of its original appearance. Yet mysteries remain. Why were certain areas given special architectural treatment? What ceremonies took place within the plazas? How many travellers passed through these gates during the height of the empire? Archaeologists continue searching for answers, and in the quiet deserts of Peru, surrounded by mountains and endless sand, Tambo, Colorado continues guarding the secrets of a vanished world. A forgotten ceremonial centre, a crossroads of empire, and one of the best preserved windows into the daily life of the ancient Inca. The city built inside a giant canyon. High in the Taurus Mountains of southern Turkey, hidden among cliffs, forests and steep rocky slopes, lie the ruins of a city that many ancient armies feared to attack. Known as Termessos, the settlement occupies one of the most dramatic locations in the ancient world. At first glance, the landscape seems almost impossible for a city. Narrow mountain passes twist between towering cliffs. Deep valleys cut through the terrain. Dense vegetation covers parts of the surrounding slopes. Then the ruins appear. Stone buildings emerge from the mountainside. Ancient streets climb steep hills. and scattered across the rugged landscape are the remains of a city that once seemed untouchable. The location was its greatest defence. Unlike many ancient cities built beside rivers or open plains, Termessos was constructed high above the surrounding region. Reaching it required navigating difficult mountain terrain that naturally protected the settlement from invasion. Any approaching army faced enormous challenges before even reaching the city walls. That advantage would eventually become legendary. The people who founded Termessos belonged to a group known as the Pisidians, communities famous throughout antiquity for their independence and their ability to survive in the rugged mountains of Anatolia. Life here was not easy. The terrain was demanding. Construction required enormous effort. Every building material had to be transported into the mountains, yet the inhabitants clearly believed the location was worth the challenge, and history would prove them right. One of the most famous moments in the city's story occurred during the 4th century BC. Alexander the Great was expanding his empire across Asia, defeating powerful kingdoms and capturing city after city. Few places managed to resist him. Termessos was one of the exceptions. When Alexander approached the mountain city, he encountered a problem. The terrain favoured the defenders completely. The narrow approaches limited movement. The mountains created natural barriers. Every path toward the city could be defended from above. Rather than risk heavy losses, Alexander eventually abandoned the attempt and continued elsewhere. The city remained unconquered. That achievement alone secured its place in history. Yet Termessos was far more than a fortress. It was a thriving urban centre. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of temples, markets, public buildings, houses, and a remarkable theatre overlooking the surrounding mountains. The theatre remains one of the most spectacular features of the site. Carved into the mountainside, it offers breathtaking views across distant valleys and peaks. Few ancient theatres anywhere in the world possess such a dramatic setting. Visitors sitting among the stone seats today often find themselves looking beyond the stage toward an endless sea of mountains. The city appears perfectly integrated into the landscape. Buildings follow natural contours. Streets adapt to the terrain. Instead of reshaping the mountain, the inhabitants worked with it. The result feels surprisingly organic, almost as if the city grew directly from the rock itself. For centuries, Termessos prospered. Trade connected it to neighbouring regions. Public buildings expanded. New monuments appeared throughout the city. Despite its remote position, the settlement participated in the broader world of the ancient Mediterranean. Yet no city remains untouched forever. Over time, changing political conditions altered the region. New powers emerged. Trade routes shifted. Economic activity gradually declined. Then nature intervened. Researchers believe earthquakes and damage to critical water systems may have contributed significantly to the city's decline. In a mountain environment, reliable water was essential. Without it, sustaining a large population became increasingly difficult. Gradually, the inhabitants left. The streets emptied. The markets fell silent. The theatre no longer hosted performances, and the city disappeared into the mountains. For centuries, forests spread across the ruins. Trees grew between stone walls. Vegetation covered ancient pathways. The mountains slowly reclaimed what humans had built. Unlike many archaeological sites, Termessos was never completely buried. Instead, it remained hidden among the wilderness, a forgotten city protected by the same rugged terrain that once defended it from invaders. Modern archaeologists and visitors eventually rediscovered the site, revealing one of Turkey's most remarkable ancient settlements. The ruins remain exceptionally atmospheric. Broken columns stand among pine trees. Ancient tombs overlook mountain valleys. Stone buildings emerge unexpectedly from the forest. Every corner of the site feels connected to the landscape around it. Even today, reaching Termessos requires effort. Visitors must climb through the mountains much as ancient travellers once did. Perhaps that journey is part of what makes the city so memorable. Unlike ruins located beside modern roads and crowded tourist centres, Termessos still feels remote, still feels hidden. And nearly 2,000 years after its abandonment, the city continues watching over the mountains from its natural fortress above the clouds. A city that resisted conquerors, a settlement protected by nature itself, and one of the most spectacular ancient ruins hidden inside a giant canyon of stone, the temple hidden beneath a field of fire. High in the mountains of central Colombia lies a mysterious archaeological site that has puzzled visitors for centuries. Known as El Infiernito, the location appears strangely out of place. The surrounding landscape is filled with rolling hills, rocky terrain, and wide open plains stretching toward distant mountains. Wind moves through the grass, clouds drift slowly across the sky, and rising from the earth are dozens of ancient stone pillars arranged in carefully planned rows. At first glance, they almost resemble the remains of a forgotten stone forest. But these stones were not placed here by nature. Someone carried them, someone positioned them, and someone gave them meaning. Long before the arrival of Europeans in South America, the region was home to the Muisca civilization, one of the most sophisticated cultures in pre-Columbian Colombia. The Muisca controlled important trade networks, developed advanced agricultural systems, and created rich religious traditions connected to the natural world. El Infiernito appears to have been one of their most important ceremonial centres. Yet unlike massive pyramids or monumental temples built elsewhere in the Americas, this sacred site feels surprisingly simple. Rows of standing stones stretch across the landscape. Some are short, others rise several feet above the ground. Together they create patterns that seem deliberate and carefully planned. For generations, local people wondered about their purpose. The Spanish who first encountered the site were equally confused. Many failed to understand what they were looking at. Some even gave the place its unusual name, El Infiernito. The Little Hell. The title had nothing to do with lava or volcanoes. Instead, it reflected the discomfort some early colonists felt toward indigenous religious sites they did not understand. Yet the true story appears far more fascinating. Researchers believe the stone alignments may have functioned as an astronomical calendar. The arrangement of the pillars seems connected to the movement of the sun across the sky. During certain times of the year, sunlight interacts with the stones in ways that may have helped ancient observers track seasonal changes. For agricultural societies, such knowledge was incredibly valuable. Knowing when to plant crops, knowing when seasons were changing, knowing when important ceremonies should occur, all of these depended on understanding the rhythms of the natural world. The more archaeologists studied the site, the more intriguing it became. El Infiernito was not simply a collection of standing stones. Evidence suggested it played an important ceremonial role within Muisca society. Pilgrims may have gathered here. Religious rituals may have taken place here. Leaders may have used the site to connect political authority with spiritual traditions. The exact details remain uncertain. The people who built El Infiernito left no written records explaining its purpose. Instead, the stones must speak for themselves, and they still have much to say. One of the most striking aspects of the site is its age. Some of the alignments may date back hundreds of years before European contact. For generations, communities returned to the same location, preserving traditions tied to the landscape and the sky above. The surrounding mountains likely played an important role as well. Many ancient cultures viewed certain landscapes as sacred. Mountains, rivers, caves, and unusual rock formations often became places of spiritual significance. El Infiernito appears connected to that same tradition. The site feels intentionally placed within its environment, not separate from nature, part of it. Over time, however, the world around it changed. Spanish colonization transformed the region. Traditional belief systems were disrupted. Ancient ceremonies disappeared. The purpose of the stone alignments gradually faded from memory. Eventually, many people forgot why the stones had been erected in the first place. Only the pillars remained, standing silently beneath the Colombian sky. For centuries they watched as generations passed around them. Today, archaeologists continue studying the site, searching for clues hidden within the alignments and surrounding landscape. Every new discovery helps reveal another piece of the story. Yet many questions remain unanswered. How accurate were the astronomical observations made here? What ceremonies took place between the stones? How important was the site within the wider Muisca world? The answers may never be fully known. But perhaps that mystery is part of what makes El Infiernito so compelling. Because standing among the ancient pillars, surrounded by mountains and endless sky, it becomes easy to imagine a time when people gathered here to watch the movements of the heavens. A sacred landscape, a forgotten observatory, and one of South America's most mysterious ceremonial centres. The stones remain, the mountains remain, and after centuries of silence, El Infiernito still guards the secrets of the civilization that built it, the forgotten kingdom hidden in desert mountains. In the northwestern deserts of Saudi Arabia, surrounded by towering sandstone cliffs and rugged mountain valleys, lie the ruins of a city that was once one of the most important crossroads in Arabia. The site is known as Dedan. Most people have never heard of it. Yet more than 2,000 years ago, caravans loaded with valuable goods travelled through this valley from every direction. Merchants arrived from distant kingdoms. Traders carried incense, spices, precious stones, and luxury products across vast stretches of desert. And at the centre of it all stood a wealthy oasis city hidden among the mountains. The location was almost perfect. The surrounding cliffs offered protection from the harsh desert environment, while underground water sources allowed agriculture to flourish where survival should have been difficult. In a land dominated by sand and rock, Dedan became a place of life. Palm groves covered parts of the valley. Fields provided food. Travellers found water and shelter before continuing their journeys across Arabia. Over time, the settlement grew into something much larger than an oasis. It became the heart of a kingdom. Archaeologists believe Dedan served as the capital of the ancient Dadanite kingdom, a civilization that prospered long before the rise of Islam and centuries before many of Arabia's later powers emerged. From this valley, rulers controlled important trade routes crossing the peninsula. Every caravan moving through the region represented opportunity. Taxes could be collected, goods could be exchanged, wealth could be accumulated. The desert itself became a highway connecting distant worlds. What makes Dedan particularly fascinating is how much of its story remained hidden for so long. Unlike Egypt, Greece, or Rome, the ancient kingdoms of Arabia often received far less attention from historians. As a result, many people assumed the region played only a minor role in ancient history. The ruins tell a different story. Excavations have uncovered evidence of sophisticated communities, monumental architecture, and extensive trade networks stretching far beyond Arabia itself. The city was connected to a surprisingly large world. One of the most striking features of Dedan can be seen directly in the cliffs surrounding the valley. Ancient tombs were carved high into the rock faces. Large rectangular openings mark their entrances. Some sit dozens of feet above the valley floor. From a distance, they resemble dark windows staring out across the desert. Their purpose remains partly mysterious. Researchers believe they belong to important individuals, but many details about the people buried there have been lost. The tombs add an atmosphere of mystery to the landscape, especially during sunrise and sunset when shadows stretch across the cliffs, and the openings seem to emerge from the stone itself. Archaeologists have also discovered inscriptions throughout the area. These ancient writings provide valuable clues about the kingdom that once existed here. Names appear, religious references appear, evidence of political authority appears. Each inscription acts like a small fragment of a much larger story, a story that historians are still trying to reconstruct. Religion likely played an important role in the city as well. Ancient sanctuaries and ceremonial spaces suggest that spiritual life was woven into the daily routines of the community. Like many civilizations of the ancient world, the people of Dedan sought meaning in the landscape around them. The mountains, valleys, and desert likely carried significance beyond their practical value. Yet despite its wealth and influence, Dedan did not remain powerful forever. Trade routes changed, new kingdoms emerged, political centres shifted elsewhere. Gradually, the city lost the position that had once made it so important. The caravans became fewer, the rulers disappeared, the kingdom faded into history. For centuries, the valley remained largely forgotten by the outside world. The tombs remained carved into the cliffs. The ruins remained scattered across the desert floor. But the story of the kingdom itself slowly vanished. Only archaeology brought it back. Modern excavations have revealed a civilization far more sophisticated and influential than many expected. Every season uncovers new structures, new inscriptions, and new clues about the people who once controlled this desert crossroads. Yet many mysteries remain. How powerful was the kingdom at its peak? How far did its influence extend across Arabia? And how many secrets still remain buried beneath the sands of the valley? Researchers continue searching for answers. And hidden among the mountains of northwestern Saudi Arabia, the ancient city of Dedan continues watching over the desert that once made it rich. A forgotten kingdom, a crossroads of trade, and one of Arabia's greatest lost cities. The island covered in giant stone platforms, far out in the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from the nearest major continent, lies one of the most mysterious ancient cities ever built. The site is known as Nan Madol. From above, it barely looks real. Dozens of artificial islands sit scattered across shallow waters, connected by narrow canals that cut through the landscape like ancient waterways. Massive stone walls rise from the ocean. Giant platforms emerge from the sea. Entire structures appear to float between the waves. For centuries, visitors struggle to believe that people built this place at all, because Nan Madol wasn't constructed on land. It was built directly on top of a coral reef, and somehow ancient builders managed to transport enormous stone blocks onto tiny islands surrounded by water. Even today, archaeologists continue debating exactly how they accomplished it. Nan Madol sits off the coast of Pohnpei, a remote island in Micronesia. The surrounding ocean stretches endlessly toward the horizon. Tropical forests cover nearby mountains. Waves break against coral reefs that protect the coastline. At first glance, it seems like an unlikely location for a major political centre. Yet centuries ago, this was the heart of the Sodelur dynasty, rulers who controlled much of Pohnpei before European contact. The city served as both a ceremonial and political capital, a place where power was concentrated, a place where rulers lived, governed, and reinforced their authority. The scale of construction remains astonishing. Many of the walls were built using enormous basalt columns stacked horizontally like giant logs. Some weigh several tons. Others had to be transported across difficult terrain before reaching the coast. The challenge becomes even more impressive when considering the geography. There were no wheeled vehicles, no cranes, no modern machinery, only human labour, ingenuity and determination. Researchers estimate that thousands of stone blocks were required to create the city. Each one had to be moved. Each one had to be positioned. Each one became part of a larger vision. The result was unlike anything else in Oceania. One of the most fascinating parts of Nan Madol is its layout. The city contains numerous artificial islets, each serving a different purpose. Some appear connected to religious ceremonies. Others may have functioned as elite residences, storage areas, or administrative centres. The outer complexes formed an important part of this network. Spread across the edges of the city, they helped create a vast landscape of canals, platforms, walls, and interconnected spaces. From the water, the city would have appeared extraordinary. Stone rising directly from the sea, canals reflecting sunlight, ceremonial structures standing above the waves. For visitors arriving by canoe, the sight must have been unforgettable. The location also reinforced political power. Rulers could control access to the city through the canal system. Important ceremonies could take place within spaces separated from ordinary communities. The architecture itself communicated authority. Everything about Nan Madol was designed to impress. Yet despite its strength and importance, the city eventually declined. The reasons remain partly uncertain. Political changes altered the balance of power on Pohnpei. New leaders emerged. Old systems weakened. Over time, the city lost the central role it once held. The population gradually moved elsewhere. The ceremonial centres fell silent. The canals remained. The stone walls remained. But the city itself began slipping into history. For generations, local traditions preserved stories about Nan Madol. Some legends claimed giants helped build the city. Others described powerful rulers with supernatural abilities. Such stories emerged partly because the ruins seemed almost impossible to explain. Even today, standing beside the massive walls can produce the same feeling. The engineering appears extraordinary. The location appears improbable. The entire city feels like something that should not exist. Modern archaeology has helped answer some questions. Researchers now understand much more about the society that built Nan Madol and the people who once lived there. Yet important mysteries remain. How exactly were the heavier stones transported? How many people worked on construction? How long did it take to complete the city? And how many structures still remain hidden beneath vegetation and shallow water? The answers continue to emerge slowly. But one thing remains certain. Nan Madol is unlike almost any other archaeological site on Earth. A city built on the sea, an island landscape transformed by human hands, and a forgotten capital where giant stone platforms still rise above the Pacific Ocean, guarding the secrets of a vanished kingdom. The desert citadel built for forgotten kings. Along the eastern coast of Oman, where rugged mountains meet the Arabian Sea, lie the ruins of a city that once connected some of the richest trade networks in the ancient world. The site is known as Kalhat. Most travellers pass through the region without realising that centuries ago this quiet coastline was one of the most important ports in Arabia. Ships arrived from India. Merchants came from Persia. Sailors crossed the Arabian Sea carrying spices, textiles, ivory, precious stones, and goods from distant lands. And overlooking it all stood a powerful city built for rulers whose names have largely faded from history. At first glance, the landscape feels harsh. Brown mountains rise abruptly from the coast. Dry valleys cut through the rocky terrain. The sea crashes against rugged shorelines that seem isolated from the outside world. Yet this location held a remarkable advantage. It sat directly along maritime trade routes linking East Africa, Arabia, India, and beyond. For centuries, wealth flowed through these waters, and much of it passed through Kalhat. The city reached its greatest prominence during the medieval period when it became one of the most important ports in the region. Foreign travellers wrote about it. Merchants sought it out. Rulers competed to control it. The prosperity generated by trade transformed the settlement into a thriving urban centre. Stone buildings filled the coastline, markets bustled with activity, warehouses stored valuable cargo arriving from across the Indian Ocean. The city became a crossroads between worlds. One of the most famous visitors was the explorer Ibn Battuta. During his travels across the medieval world, he described Kalhat as a prosperous and impressive city. His accounts provide rare glimpses into a place that has since largely disappeared. At the time, the harbour would have been filled with ships arriving from distant ports. Languages from across Asia and Africa could likely be heard in the streets. Goods from thousands of miles away changed hands within its markets. Few places in Arabia were better connected. Yet Kalhat was more than a trading centre. Archaeological evidence suggests it also served as an important political and ceremonial centre. Powerful rulers invested in monumental architecture designed to demonstrate wealth and authority. Among the most famous structures was the Bibi Mariam Mausoleum, a remarkable building that became one of the city's defining landmarks. Even in ruin, it remains one of the most recognisable features of the site. The structure reflects the prosperity that once flowed through the city. Its builders clearly intended it to impress visitors arriving from the sea, and for centuries it did exactly that. The surrounding landscape adds another layer to the city's story. Unlike many coastal settlements built on flat shorelines, Kalhat sits between mountains and sea. The terrain naturally limited expansion while also providing a degree of protection. Approaching the city from the water would have been a dramatic experience. Mountains rising behind stone buildings, ships crowding the harbour, the scent of trade goods arriving from distant kingdoms. Everything about the location communicated importance, yet prosperity rarely lasts forever. As centuries passed, political conditions changed across the region. Trade routes evolved, new ports emerged, competition increased, then nature intervened. Historical records and archaeological evidence suggest that powerful earthquakes damaged parts of the city. Buildings collapsed, infrastructure suffered. Recovery became increasingly difficult. The once thriving port began to decline. Merchants looked elsewhere. Ships stopped arriving in the same numbers. The city that had once connected continents slowly lost its position within the wider world. Eventually it was abandoned. The harbour fell silent. The markets disappeared. The rulers vanished from history. Only the ruins remained. For generations, wind and sea air weathered the abandoned structures. Stone walls deteriorated. Sand accumulated across ancient streets. The city gradually blended into the landscape around it. Yet it was never completely forgotten. Travellers continued mentioning the ruins. Local traditions preserved memories of its former importance. And when archaeologists began studying the site, they uncovered evidence of one of the most significant maritime cities in Arabian history. Today, visitors walking among the remains often struggle to imagine the scale of activity that once filled the coastline. The ruins feel peaceful, quiet, almost isolated. Yet beneath that silence lies the story of a city that once connected kingdoms separated by oceans. A place where merchants, sailors, rulers, and travellers from distant lands crossed paths. And along the coast of Oman, Overlooking the waters that made it rich, Kalhat continues guarding the secrets of a forgotten age of trade. A desert citadel by the sea, a city built for forgotten kings, and one of Arabia's greatest lost ports. The forgotten city built on a mountain ridge. High in the Andes Mountains of Peru, where clouds drift between jagged peaks and steep valleys, disappear into the distance, lies the remains of a city that seems almost suspended between earth and sky. Known as Pisac, the site occupies a narrow mountain ridge overlooking the sacred valley. From below, the ruins appear nearly impossible. Stone walls cling to cliffs. Terraces wrap around mountainsides. Ancient buildings stand where the terrain seems too steep for construction of any kind. Even today, visitors often wonder the same thing. How did anyone build a city here? The answer begins during the height of the Inca Empire. Long before Spanish explorers arrived in South America, the Incas were expanding across the Andes, creating one of the largest empires in the ancient world. Their engineers became famous for accomplishing what many believed impossible. Roads crossed mountains, bridges spanned deep canyons, and cities appeared in places where nature seemed to leave no room for them. Pisac was one of their greatest achievements. The location was chosen carefully. From the ridge, inhabitants could see enormous stretches of the sacred valley below. Important routes passed through the region, making the site strategically valuable. Any movement through the valley could be observed from above. The mountain itself became a natural fortress. Steep slopes protected the city from multiple directions. Narrow approaches limited access. For defenders, few locations could have been better. Yet Pisac was never simply a military stronghold. Archaeologists believe the city served several purposes at once. It functioned as a ceremonial centre, an agricultural hub, a place of administration, and possibly a royal estate connected to the rulers of the empire. The different sections of the site reveal this complexity. Religious structures occupy prominent locations, residential areas spread across portions of the ridge, and everywhere, enormous agricultural terraces reshape the mountainside. These terraces remain one of the most impressive features of Pisac. Thousands of feet above sea level, Inca engineers transformed steep slopes into productive farmland. Layer after layer of stone-supported terraces follows the contours of the mountain. From a distance, they resemble giant stairways climbing toward the sky. The system was remarkably effective. The terraces reduced erosion, improved growing conditions, and allowed agriculture to flourish in terrain that would otherwise be unusable. Even after centuries, many remain intact. The builders clearly understood the mountain. Rather than fighting the landscape, they adapted to it. One of the most fascinating aspects of Pisac is the precision of its stonework. Many walls were constructed using carefully shaped stones fitted together without mortar. The joints are so precise that even today it can be difficult to slide a knife blade between them. This level of craftsmanship appears throughout the site: doorways, temples, foundations. Everywhere, the stonework reflects extraordinary skill. The religious importance of Pisac can also be seen in its design. Certain structures appear aligned with prominent mountains and features of the surrounding landscape. For the Inca, mountains often held spiritual significance. They were viewed as powerful entities connected to the natural and sacred world. Pisac seems deeply connected to those beliefs. The city does not merely sit on the mountain, it becomes part of it. Walking through the ruins today, visitors encounter narrow pathways winding between stone walls and terraces. At every turn, the landscape dominates the experience. Cliffs fall away dramatically, peaks rise in the distance, clouds move across the valley below. The setting feels almost unreal. Yet for centuries this was a thriving community. Then everything changed. The arrival of the Spanish transformed the Andes forever. The Inca Empire collapsed. Political systems that had governed the region for generations disappeared. Many mountain settlements were abandoned or dramatically altered. Pisac gradually lost its original purpose. The population moved elsewhere. The ceremonial spaces fell silent. The terraces remained. For centuries the ruins watched over the valley while the world changed around them. Nature slowly reclaimed parts of the site. Grass-covered pathways, stone, structures weathered beneath mountain storms. Yet unlike many ancient cities, Pisac never completely disappeared. The scale of its construction made that impossible. The terraces remained visible, the walls endured, The mountain continued preserving the work of the people who built it. Today, Pisac stands as one of Peru's most remarkable archaeological sites, not because it is the largest, not because it is the most famous, but because few places demonstrate the relationship between humans and landscape so beautifully. A city balanced on a ridge, a fortress among the clouds, and a forgotten mountain settlement where the achievements of the Inca still rise above the sacred valley, nearly 500 years after the empire itself vanished. The stone fortress built on top of a giant mesa. High in the rugged highlands of northern Ethiopia, where steep cliffs rise above vast valleys and ancient pathways wind through the mountains, lies a forgotten fortress that once watched over one of Africa's greatest civilizations. The site is known as Gobedra. Today, only scattered ruins remain. Broken stone walls stretch across a rocky plateau. Ancient foundations emerge from the earth. Wind moves across the highlands much as it has for thousands of years. At first glance, the site appears isolated, almost forgotten. But centuries ago, this mountain stronghold occupied one of the most important positions in the Kingdom of Axum, a civilization that controlled trade routes stretching across Africa, Arabia, and beyond. The location itself is extraordinary. Gobedra sits atop a massive elevated plateau overlooking the surrounding landscape. Steep slopes fall away on multiple sides, creating natural defences that would have made the site extremely difficult to attack. Anyone approaching the fortress could be seen long before they arrived. The builders understood exactly what they were doing. In the ancient world, high ground meant security, and few places offered more security than Gobedra. The fortress occupied a strategic position near Axum, the legendary capital of one of Africa's most powerful ancient kingdoms. For centuries, Axum stood among the great civilizations of the ancient world. Its rulers controlled important trade networks connecting the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, Arabia, and the interior of Africa. Gold, ivory, incense, and luxury goods moved through the kingdom. Wealth flowed into its cities. Monumental architecture transformed the landscape. And somewhere within this larger world, Gobedra served as one of its guardians. Researchers believe the fortress likely played a military role, protecting important routes leading toward the heart of the kingdom. From its elevated position, defenders could monitor movement across vast areas of countryside. Caravans, travellers, potential enemies. Everything became visible from the heights of the plateau. The natural geography turned the site into a fortress long before the first stone wall was built. The builders simply strengthened what nature had already provided. Walking through the ruins today reveals traces of that effort. Stone walls follow the contours of the mesa. Defensive positions overlook steep drops. Foundations suggest structures once occupied key locations across the plateau. Although much has disappeared over time, enough remains to reveal the strategic brilliance of the site. The surrounding landscape adds to the atmosphere. Deep valleys stretch into the distance. Mountain ridges fade into the horizon. The highlands seem almost endless. Standing on the edge of the mesa, it becomes easy to understand why ancient rulers valued the location. The view alone provided an enormous advantage. Yet Gobedra may have served purposes beyond defence. Many ancient fortresses became centres of administration as well. Officials could oversee nearby territories, collect information, and maintain control over important regions. In a kingdom as extensive as Axum, such locations were essential. Power depended not only on armies, but also on communication and organisation. Fortresses helped make both possible. The story of Axum itself is remarkable. During its height, the kingdom minted its own coins, built monumental stone structures, and established connections with civilizations across multiple continents. Ancient writers described it as one of the great powers of the era. Yet like many civilizations, its fortunes eventually changed. Trade routes shifted, political conditions evolved, new powers emerged. Over time, the influence of Axum declined. As the kingdom weakened, many sites connected to its authority lost their importance. Gobedra appears to have followed the same path. The soldiers departed, the watchmen disappeared. The fortress gradually fell silent. Wind replaced conversation. Grass grew between stones. The highland stronghold slowly became part of the landscape once again. For centuries the ruins remained largely untouched. Their remote location helped preserve them. While cities expanded elsewhere, Gobedra continued overlooking the valleys below much as it had for generations. Only archaeology would eventually bring renewed attention to the site. Researchers studying the region recognized its importance within the wider story of Aksumite civilization. Every wall, foundation, and artifact offered clues about how one of Africa's greatest kingdoms protected its territory and maintained its influence. Yet many mysteries remain. How many people once lived within the fortress? How large was the military presence? What events unfolded atop the mesa during the height of Aksum's power? The ruins provide hints, but not complete answers, and perhaps that uncertainty is part of what makes Gobedra so fascinating. Because high above the Ethiopian highlands, surrounded by cliffs and endless horizons, the ancient fortress still stands watch, a forgotten stronghold of a lost kingdom, a stone fortress above the clouds, and a silent reminder of one of Africa's most remarkable civilizations. The ancient city built around a bottomless well. High in the mountains of central Afghanistan, surrounded by steep valleys and barren cliffs, lie the ruins of a city that once controlled one of the most important regions along the Silk Road. Today, the site is known as Share Golghola. The name is often translated as the City of Screams, and few archaeological sites possess a more haunting reputation. Perched on a rocky hill above the Bamyan Valley, the ruins overlook a landscape that has witnessed empires rise and fall for more than 2,000 years. At first glance, the city seems perfectly positioned. Steep slopes protect its sides. The surrounding mountains provide natural defences. From the summit, enormous stretches of the valley become visible in every direction. Ancient rulers could see travellers approaching long before they arrived. They could monitor trade routes. They could defend the valley below. Everything about the location suggests power. Yet hidden among the ruins is one of the site's most enduring mysteries, a deep, ancient well. For generations, local stories claimed the well had no bottom. According to legend, people dropped stones into the darkness and waited endlessly for the sound of impact. Some claimed it connected to hidden underground passages. Others believed it descended into chambers buried beneath the mountain itself. Whether those stories were true hardly mattered. The mystery became part of the city's identity. And in a place already surrounded by legends, the well only deepened the atmosphere. Long before the ruins appeared, the Bamyan Valley occupied a strategic position connecting Central Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East. Merchants carrying silk, spices, precious metals, and luxury goods passed through the region for centuries. Caravans moved along routes linking distant civilizations. The valley became wealthy from trade. Cities flourished. Religious communities established themselves throughout the surrounding mountains. Share Golghola benefited from all of it. The settlement grew into a fortified city overlooking one of the most valuable corridors in the region. Stone walls protected the hilltop. Defensive structures guarded important approaches. Homes, storage facilities, and administrative buildings filled the interior. At its height, the city must have been a formidable sight. Travellers entering the valley would have seen its walls rising above the landscape, dominating the route below. The city's greatest strength was its position. Few attackers could approach without being seen. The hill itself functioned like a natural fortress. For centuries, that advantage helped protect the settlement. Then came one of the most dramatic events in its history. In the early 13th century, the armies of Genghis Khan entered the region. The Mongol Empire was expanding rapidly across Asia, conquering cities and kingdoms at an astonishing pace. When resistance emerged, the response could be devastating. Historical accounts describe a brutal siege at Share Golghola. The city's defenders resisted fiercely, but eventually the Mongols broke through. What followed became part of local legend. Stories describe widespread destruction and enormous loss of life. According to tradition, the cries of the inhabitants echoed across the valley during the final assault. That memory supposedly inspired the name City of Screams. Whether every detail survived accurately through the centuries is impossible to know. But the event clearly left a lasting mark on regional memory. The city never fully recovered. Although parts of the settlement remained occupied afterward, its importance gradually declined. Trade routes shifted. Political centres moved elsewhere. The once powerful fortress slowly became a ruin. Wind replaced the sounds of daily life. Grass appeared between broken walls. The city that had once watched over the valley faded into silence. Yet the ruins never disappeared completely. Travellers continued noticing them high above the landscape, Local stories continued preserving memories of the past. The mysterious well remained part of those stories. Some visitors came specifically to see it. Others came to explore the abandoned fortress itself. Archaeologists studying the site discovered evidence of fortifications, residential areas, and structures that helped reveal how the city functioned during its peak. Every wall offered clues. Every foundation hinted at lives once lived atop the mountain, yet many questions remain unanswered. How many people once lived here? What secrets still lie buried beneath the ruins? And what was the true purpose of the legendary well hidden within the city? The answers remain uncertain. Perhaps some were lost during the city's destruction. Perhaps others still wait beneath the earth. But even today, standing among the ruins of Archaeological, it is easy to understand why the site continues capturing imaginations. The cliffs, the silence, the endless views across the valley. And somewhere among the broken stones, the dark opening of a well that generations believed had no end. A forgotten fortress, a city scarred by history, and one of Afghanistan's most haunting archaeological mysteries, the Stone Kingdom, hidden in the Atlas Mountains. In the rugged mountains of Morocco, where rocky ridges stretch toward the horizon and deep valleys cut through the landscape, lies a site that has completely changed our understanding of human history. Today, it is known as Jebel Irhoud. At first glance, the location seems unremarkable. There are no giant temples, no massive fortresses, no towering stone monuments visible from miles away. Just a remote hillside surrounded by harsh terrain and endless mountains. Yet beneath the ground, archaeologists uncovered something far more important than gold or treasure. They found ancient human remains, and those remains forced scientists to rethink the story of where we came from. For decades, many researchers believed the earliest members of our species appeared in a relatively small part of East Africa, before spreading across the world. Then discoveries at Jebel Irhoud began changing that picture. The site sits within a landscape that feels ancient even today. Winds sweep across rocky slopes. The Atlas Mountains rise in the distance. The environment can appear harsh and unforgiving, but hundreds of thousands of years ago this region looked very different. Grasslands covered parts of the landscape. Animals roamed areas that are much drier today. Human groups moved through the region hunting, gathering, and adapting to a constantly changing environment. At some point, people occupied the area around Jebel Irhoud. They left behind tools, they left behind evidence of fires, and eventually they left behind something even more valuable: themselves. The story of the discovery began during mining operations in the 20th century. Workers uncovered bones that immediately attracted scientific attention. Further excavations revealed additional remains along with stone tools and other artifacts. At first, researchers struggled to understand exactly what they had found. The fossils seemed both familiar and unusual. The faces looked remarkably modern, yet other features appeared more ancient. The puzzle remained unsolved for years. Then improved dating techniques transformed everything. When scientists re-examined the site using modern methods, the results were astonishing. The remains were approximately 300,000 years old, far older than many researchers expected. The discovery pushed back the known history of Homo sapiens and suggested that the origins of our species were far more complex than previously believed. Suddenly, Jebel Irhoud became one of the most important archaeological sites on Earth. The people who lived here were not building cities. They were not constructing monuments, yet their story may be more significant than any kingdom or empire, because they represent some of the earliest known members of our own species. The stone tools found alongside the remains provide additional clues. Many were carefully crafted using techniques that required planning and skill. These were not random objects. They were tools created by people who understood their environment and knew how to survive within it. Evidence of fire was also discovered. That detail may seem simple today. But controlled fire represented one of humanity's greatest achievements. It provided warmth, protection, light, and new ways of preparing food. The discoveries paint a picture of communities living in a world vastly different from our own, a world filled with giant predators, changing climates, and constant challenges. Yet these early humans adapted successfully. They survived, and eventually their descendants spread across the globe. One of the most fascinating aspects of Jebel Irhoud is how it changed scientific thinking. For many years, human origins were often presented as a relatively straightforward story. The evidence from Morocco suggested something more complicated. Perhaps early Homo sapiens populations were spread across larger areas of Africa than previously believed. Perhaps different groups interacted over enormous distances. Perhaps the emergence of our species happened across an entire continent rather than within a single region. The debate continues today, and Jebel Irhoud remains at the centre of it. The site itself feels surprisingly quiet. There are no enormous ruins attracting crowds of tourists, no dramatic walls rising above the landscape. Yet hidden beneath the rocky ground is evidence connected to one of the most important chapters in human history. Every new study adds another piece to the puzzle. Every new discovery helps researchers better understand who these early people were and how they lived. Yet many questions remain. What languages, if any, did they speak? How did they organize their communities? What did the surrounding landscape truly look like 300,000 years ago? Some answers may never be known. But the search continues, and high in the Moroccan mountains, Jebel Irhoud remains one of the most extraordinary archaeological sites ever discovered. Not because it reveals a lost kingdom, but because it reveals something even older, a glimpse into the distant beginnings of humanity itself, the lost capital of the forgotten Kushite kings. Rising from the deserts of northern Sudan is a mountain that seems completely out of place. It does not dominate the landscape through sheer size. It is not the tallest peak in the region. Yet for thousands of years, people believed it was one of the most sacred places in Africa. The mountain is known as Gebel Barkal, and at its base once stood the capital of a kingdom powerful enough to conquer Egypt itself. Today, the ruins appear quiet. Broken temples lie scattered across the desert. Ancient walls emerge from the sand. Weathered statues and stone blocks rest beneath an endless sky. But more than 2,000 years ago, this was one of the most important cities in the ancient world, a royal capital, a religious centre, and the heart of the Kushite kingdom. The landscape immediately explains part of the mystery. Gebel Barkal rises dramatically above the surrounding plains, creating a landmark visible for miles in every direction. Ancient travellers moving along the Nile could see the mountain long before reaching it. Its unusual shape made it unforgettable. To the Kushites, this was no ordinary mountain. It was sacred. Many believed it was connected to the god Amun, one of the most important deities in the region. The mountain became a symbol of divine authority, and rulers built their capital beside it. The city that grew here became known as Napata. For centuries it served as one of the most important centres of Kushite civilization. Temples filled the landscape. Priests conducted ceremonies. Kings ruled from nearby palaces. The city became both a political and spiritual centre. Its influence stretched far beyond the surrounding desert. The kingdom of Kush controlled valuable trade routes running through northeastern Africa. Gold, ivory, exotic animals and luxury goods moved through its territory. The Nile connected the kingdom to Egypt and the wider ancient world. As wealth increased, so did power. Eventually, Kushite rulers achieved something extraordinary. They conquered Egypt. During the 8th century BC, Kushite kings expanded northward and established control over one of the most famous civilizations in history. For a time, the rulers of Kush became pharaohs of Egypt. Their empire stretched across enormous distances, and despite governing Egypt, they continued maintaining strong connections to Gebel Barkal. The sacred mountain remained at the centre of their world. Archaeologists have uncovered remarkable evidence of that connection. Temples dedicated to Amun stand near the mountain. Monumental inscriptions describe royal achievements. Statues of kings and gods once filled ceremonial spaces. Everywhere, the landscape reflects the importance of religion within Kushite society. The builders clearly believed the mountain itself possessed special significance. One of the most striking features is the towering sandstone pinnacle rising from the side of Gebel Barkal. Ancient people interpreted its shape in symbolic ways. Some believed it resembled a sacred crown. Others connected it to divine imagery associated with kingship and power. Whatever its exact meaning, it became central to local beliefs. The mountain was not simply part of the landscape, it was part of the kingdom's identity. Yet like every ancient capital, Napata eventually faced change. Powerful empires emerged around it. Political centres shifted. New cities gained importance. Although the Kushite kingdom survived for centuries, the role of Napata gradually evolved. Some royal activities moved elsewhere. Trade routes changed. The city slowly lost the position it once held. But it was never entirely forgotten. The sacred mountain remained. Pilgrims continued visiting, temples remained standing, and memories of the kingdom survived long after its political influence declined. For centuries, desert winds swept across the ruins. Sand covered portions of the city. Walls collapsed. Statues broke apart. The capital of the Kushite kings slowly faded into the landscape. Then archaeologists arrived. Excavations revealed temples, inscriptions, royal monuments, and evidence of a civilization that many people knew surprisingly little about. The discoveries transformed understanding of ancient Africa. Researchers realized that Kush was not merely a neighbor of Egypt. It was a powerful kingdom with its own traditions, achievements, and rulers. A kingdom capable of shaping history on a continental scale. Yet many mysteries remain. How much of ancient Napata still lies buried beneath the desert? What ceremonies took place beneath the shadow of Gebel Bakal? And why did this particular mountain become so sacred to generations of rulers? The answers remain hidden among the ruins. But one thing is certain. Standing beside Gebel Bakal today, it is easy to understand why ancient kings chose this place for their capital. The mountain still dominates the horizon, the temples still rise from the sand, and the lost heart of the Kushite kingdom still watches over the Nile, just as it did thousands of years ago. A forgotten capital, a sacred mountain, and one of Africa's greatest ancient mysteries. The city built on top of a mountain. Nobody could conquer. Long before the pyramids of Sudan attracted archaeologists from around the world, before powerful empires fought over the Nile, and before many of history's greatest kingdoms even existed, a civilization was already rising along the banks of the river in what is now northern Sudan. Its capital was Kerma, and for nearly 1,000 years it stood among the most powerful cities in Africa. Today, the ruins appear quiet. Ancient mud brick walls rise from the desert floor. Broken foundations stretch across the landscape. Wind moves through a place that was once filled with rulers, merchants, soldiers, and craftsmen. Yet beneath those ruins lies the story of a kingdom that challenged Egypt itself, a kingdom whose capital became one of the richest cities in the ancient world, and at the centre of that story stood a heavily fortified citadel built to protect the heart of the kingdom. The landscape around Kerma seems deceptively peaceful. The Nile flows nearby, desert plains stretch toward the horizon, distant hills rise beyond the valley. But thousands of years ago, this region occupied one of the most valuable locations in northeastern Africa. Trade routes crossed through it, gold moved through it, caravans travelled across it. Whoever controlled Kerma controlled wealth, and wealth attracted rivals. Archaeologists believe the kingdom of Kerma emerged around 2500 BC, eventually becoming one of the earliest major states in Africa outside Egypt. For centuries, the kingdom grew stronger. Its rulers accumulated resources. Its influence expanded along the Nile. Its capital developed into a thriving centre of power. The city itself was impressive. Large ceremonial buildings dominated parts of the settlement. Residential districts spread outward. Workshops produced goods for local use and long-distance trade. Everything reflected the confidence of a civilization at its peak. Yet perhaps the most important area was the citadel. Built on elevated ground overlooking parts of the city, the fortified complex served as both a defensive position and a symbol of authority. From here, rulers could oversee the kingdom's affairs. From here, they could monitor threats. And from here, they could demonstrate their power to everyone below. The defences were formidable for their time. Massive walls surrounded key sections of the settlement. Strategic positions controlled movement through important areas. Elevated locations provided clear views across the surrounding landscape. Any attacking force would have faced enormous difficulties. The citadel was designed to survive, and for centuries it did. One reason Kerma became so successful was its position between different worlds. To the north lay Egypt. To the south stretched regions rich in resources and trade opportunities. The city became a bridge connecting distant territories. Gold, ivory, livestock, precious stones, and exotic goods passed through its markets. Wealth accumulated rapidly, and the kingdom grew stronger because of it. Eventually, Egypt took notice. For long periods, relations between the two civilizations shifted between cooperation and conflict. Sometimes trade flourished, at other times armies marched. Ancient Egyptian records occasionally describe powerful rulers emerging from the south. Many historians believe those references pointed toward Kerma. The kingdom became one of Egypt's most significant rivals. That rivalry helped shape centuries of history along the Nile. Excavations revealed evidence of the city's prosperity. Archaeologists uncovered enormous tombs belonging to powerful rulers. Rich burial goods demonstrated access to valuable resources. Ceremonial structures revealed complex religious traditions. The discoveries challenged older assumptions about ancient Africa. Kerma was not a minor settlement influenced entirely by outsiders. It was a powerful civilization in its own right. A civilization capable of creating monumental architecture, maintaining trade networks, and competing with neighbouring powers. Yet no kingdom remains dominant forever. Over time, Egypt expanded southward. Military campaigns altered the balance of power. Political conditions changed. Eventually, Kerma's independence came to an end. The city continued to exist, but its role transformed. The kingdom that had once rivaled Egypt disappeared into history. The citadel remained. The walls remained. But the rulers who built them were gone. Centuries passed. New cultures appeared. New kingdoms rose along the Nile. The ancient capital slowly faded into obscurity. Sand covered portions of the ruins. Buildings collapsed. The desert reclaimed the landscape. Then archaeologists arrived. Their discoveries revealed the true importance of the site. Every excavation uncovered more evidence of a civilization that had been overlooked for far too long. The city emerged from the sand once again, not as a legend, not as a myth, but as one of the great capitals of ancient Africa. Today, visitors walking through the ruins often struggle to imagine the power that once existed here. The site feels peaceful now, almost silent. Yet thousands of years ago, this was a place where kings ruled, armies gathered, and fortunes were made. A city built to endure. Citadel built to protect an empire. And one of the greatest ancient capitals ever to rise along the Nile. High above the surrounding plain, the old fortress still watches over Kerma, just as it has for nearly 4,000 years. The mountain covered in forgotten thrones. In the highlands of northern Ethiopia, surrounded by rugged mountains and ancient trade routes, stands a temple complex older than many of the civilizations that would later dominate history. Today, the site is known as Yeha. At first glance, it appears surprisingly simple. Massive stone walls rise above the landscape. Ancient foundations stretch across the hillside. Ruins emerge from the earth beneath an endless African sky. Yet beneath those stones lies the story of a kingdom that existed long before the famous rulers of Aksum, a kingdom whose history remains partly hidden, and a place that may have served as one of the earliest centres of power in Ethiopia. The landscape itself feels timeless. Mountain ridges roll toward the horizon. Narrow valleys cut through the highlands. Ancient pathways still wind across the terrain much as they did thousands of years ago. For travellers moving through the region, Yeha occupied an ideal position. It sat near important routes connecting the African interior with the Red Sea coast. Goods moved through these corridors. Ideas moved through them as well. And over time, wealth and influence gathered around the settlement. The most impressive structure at the site is known simply as the Great Temple. Even after nearly 3,000 years, much of it remains standing. The building was constructed using enormous stone blocks fitted together with remarkable precision. Some walls rise more than 40 feet high. The accuracy of the construction continues to impress archaeologists today. No mortar holds many of the stones together, yet the structure has survived earthquakes, weather, and centuries of change. The builders clearly possessed extraordinary skill. Researchers believe the temple was dedicated to Al-Maka, an important deity worshipped in parts of southern Arabia and the Horn of Africa. That connection reveals something fascinating. Yeha was not isolated. The settlement participated in a larger world of trade and cultural exchange stretching across the Red Sea. Merchants crossed the water carrying goods between Arabia and Africa. Ideas travelled alongside them. Architectural styles spread. Religious traditions spread. The temple itself reflects those connections. Its design contains influences that archaeologists recognize from ancient South Arabian civilizations. Yet Yeha was never simply a copy of another culture. It developed its own identity, its own traditions, and eventually its own place in African history. Beyond the temple, excavations uncovered evidence of elite residences, ceremonial spaces, and structures associated with political authority. This is where the mystery deepens. Many researchers believe Yeha functioned as a major centre of power long before the rise of the Aksumite kingdom. Important leaders may have ruled from here. Religious ceremonies may have shaped the region's spiritual life. Decisions affecting entire communities may have been made within sight of the temple walls. In a sense, Yeha may have been a city of thrones, not literal thrones carved into stone, but a place where authority gathered, where rulers exercised power, and where generations of leaders left their mark upon the landscape. The surrounding mountains likely reinforced that authority. Throughout history, elevated locations often carried symbolic importance. They created separation from ordinary life. They inspired awe. They connected rulers and religious leaders with the landscape around them. Yeha seems to embody that relationship perfectly. The site dominates its surroundings without overwhelming them. The mountain and the city became part of the same story. Yet like so many ancient centres of power, Yeha eventually declined. New political systems emerged. Trade routes shifted. Other cities gained importance. The settlement gradually lost the influence it once possessed. The rulers disappeared. The ceremonies ended. The temple remained. For centuries, local communities lived among the ruins while the wider world largely forgot the site's significance. The stones endured. The mountain endured. And beneath layers of history, the memory of an ancient kingdom survived. Modern archaeology changed everything. Excavations revealed one of the oldest monumental structures in sub-Saharan Africa. Every discovery helped illuminate a period of history that remains poorly understood. Researchers realized that Yeha represented something extraordinary, a window into the early foundations of Ethiopian civilization. Yet many mysteries remain unanswered. Who were the rulers who governed here? How extensive was their influence? What ceremonies unfolded inside the temple nearly 3,000 years ago? And how many secrets still lie buried beneath the surrounding hills? The answers remain hidden among the ruins. But standing before the massive stone walls of Yeha today, one thing becomes clear. This was no ordinary settlement. It was a place of power, a place of memory, a mountain covered in the echoes of forgotten kings, and one of Africa's oldest and most remarkable archaeological treasures.